Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. My guides recently gave me a really specific message and approach to using psychic awareness that was custom tailored for a client I was working with. And as soon as they dropped it in, it occurred to me that it was something that many people might find really useful and valuable. So you might find it really valuable just as another way to understand how to connect with your wisdom and guidance, particularly if the waters are stormy. So one of the things I talked about in another podcast is the fact that the more emotionally unregulated we are, which happens at times, emotions are supposed to have the chance to move through, but these moments when we're feeling really triggered and activated and maybe have some emotional debt, so we've had a really big reaction to some stimulus, or maybe our baseline, we're working with a stack of things, so there's more reactivity. That's a moment where it would be really good to be able to feel our guides and talk to them and chart a path forward. But the availability of our usual being able to get quiet or tune in, whether you're using shamanic journey or tarot cards or meditation or a pendulum or whatever it is that is your particular way of accessing information. There's a lot of them. Of course, I'm biased towards shamanic journey. It may be a lot more difficult, and there may be more vulnerability to your emotional investment kind of influencing the outcome. I feel like this is kind of the biggest collection of people or demographic that is going to benefit from this. So I'm talking about it a bit more at the beginning. But one of the things that I think is really useful to know about how our brains are wired is how much we mentally justify an emotionally motivated decision. We rationalize something that we want or desire or afraid of emotionally. And there's a certain rigorousness to know, what your agenda is. And it's useful to spot in other people if somebody is really addictive about something. Their ability to behave in an uncharacteristically unethical way is really high. I've had women that I liked and respected who were kind and collaborative in community, who had gotten into being the other woman in a romantic relationship and were really struggling and making their way through it. And if you'd asked them before they found themselves participating in this way, they would have said, oh no, absolutely, never in a million years would I do that. But there was some part of them that was so compelled that next thing you know, they're finding rationalizations. And I have compassion for that. I also don't think necessarily being out of step with our values and integrity necessarily is a sign of health. So you might not be at the resting place on your interpersonal journey if you have, something going on. But anyone who's ever battled an addiction or just hey, I think I should cut down my sugar consumption or maybe drink a little bit less wine or, get more reliable about, steady, sustained exercise, knows the voice that is such a good rationalizer when you really do not want to implement that lifestyle change. So the challenge with psychic ability is a lot of times we can project what we want to be true, read that information, and then interpret it as the guides or the universe or whatever we vision the divine as, telling us and validating a course of action that may not be particularly sustainable. So I've certainly heard plenty of people rationalizing, my guides told me, and I'm like, I don't think that was your guides, that were giving you this really interesting message that seems to be a justification in acting in a path that some part of you really, really wants, but probably isn't looking like it's going to have the balance and sustainability and holistic effect in your life that you would want. So this can be really useful as a supplement to ways that you tune into your guidance, and it can also be really useful at moments when you're activated and emotional and off your center for getting more reliable, appropriate guidance in that moment. This is also something I think will be really supportive for someone who's really struggling with the tension between fear and longing for connecting with their guides. And so there are just a lot of religious backgrounds that people who work with me have come from that will tell them that shamanism is witchcraft or of the devil or, a terrible thing that's going to create some unspecified dire consequences in their life. And even when they, really feel that framework isn't a good fit, there's still kind of that like superstitious fear. There are a lot of times we maybe toss salt over our shoulder just because, I watched my grandmother do it and there's like, well, just in case. I don't do that as much anymore, but certainly when I was younger. So there can be a tension with having had people tell you something so strongly and intensely that doesn't resonate for you, but our brains really file away the emotionally charged information. That's kind of how they're hardwired. So it takes a good bit to really kind of deprogram and get the neuroplasticity to really fully let go of those kind of beliefs. And so maybe you're kind of in that in-between place where you have some concerns or anxiety or fear, and maybe it's not even something someone else told you. Maybe it's just an apprehension, but you'd like to progress forward. And I don't think it's good to do psychic activities under the influence of fear. You can have adverse experiences. So this isn't something to push through if the fear is particularly high. If it's like a 2, that's fine. But if you've got like a 8 out of 10 level of fear or higher, probably you want to resolve that before you go engaging. So this could be something that could feel safer and more attainable. And the category where this came up is a type of client I've worked with regularly. And it's somebody who's dealing with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, who's hearing voices. And I want to be really clear. I'm not one-stop shopping. If you're having those kind of issues, I think there's a lot that the medical model understands about how signals get misinterpreted in the brain. And I think that's part of these experiences. But I also think it's an insufficiently firm barrier between our ability to put our focus into ordinary reality or non-ordinary reality. So what I do with the mind traveling and shifting of my awareness in shamanic journey, I have a lot of control and volition and ability to command my space and make sure I'm only talking to spirit guides that are, really on the side of my good. And that's where really competent shamanic training is really helpful for how to go about that. I approach trying to teach that in my book, Practical Shamanism, which, kind of gives you the basics. It is a little bit hard to learn on your own unless you have, sort of some really open psychic ability. So something like the Foundation for Shamanic Studies offers terrific courses. And with COVID, they've ended up putting a lot of them online as well as the in-person. In-person is glorious, but I love that that's accessible and attainable. And I just think they're a neat organization with really, really well thought out how to safely train people to engage with this, and being in a group environment really, really opens things up. But for people who are dealing with schizophrenia, who are hearing voices, who are having entity problems, who have a lot of fear, it's counterindicated to be sending your awareness out with shamanic journey. For these demographics, a lot of times my guides are like, we're just working so hard on the structural integrity of your field, which is overly permeable, so things can't come in and mess with you. We're really, really trying to build the strength of your energy body. And there's certainly, homework exercises you can do with that. I have an entity program that's very affordable that just really goes through how to work with this, wacky and potentially debilitating and very, very disruptive experience, and how to strengthen your energy body and work with being on a path to move to the other side of it. One of the things that's hard about entity stuff is it really isn't something I can do on behalf of someone. When I do a soul retrieval session, I can do the work on their behalf. They give me the guidance, and then I go forth with my team of guides that work with their team of guides, and we make this change for them, which I think is really cool. I think, it's awesome when we don't have to, work harder or have another daily practice. Not that those aren't cool, but our lives can be really, really full, and there's a lot of stuff that we're, tending to. And so I think it's wonderful, the work that I can just do on behalf of someone, but really rebuilding someone's energy field when it's gotten damaged and is permeable and they're having these issues isn't something I can help with. It I can get them going, I can do a clearing, but there's a necessity of doing this rebuilding. But in the meantime, the people who have entity issues are sometimes people who have some of the biggest longings to hear their spirit guides and connect with spirit. It's a very important and significant part of them that has kind of come out of balance. They've got too much of their psychic pathways uncontrollably open, which means there can be a feedback loop of things poking at them and them getting freaked out, and then more things poke at them, and it's really, really unpleasant. And so the whole, it's kind of like, I'm imagining telling a professional tennis player that their injury means that they need to rest their arm for 6 months, and that they can't do this thing that they love to do and are marvelous at and have natural talent and passion. And that's a really hard thing to be not able to express and engage with such an important part of yourself, because our ability to have a personal direct connection to spirit is something that's really important. So this message, when it came through, was specifically for a client who's navigating that over permeability of the energy field, hearing voices. Some of them are there, some of them aren't, and at the same time really longing to connect with her authentic spirit guides. It's really hard that that's not available. So the guides sort of walked me through and layers of anatomy of the whole human soul experience in a really specific way that will kind of illuminate this ability to access this deep wisdom through a different pathway than using your conscious mind to send your awareness in a shamanic journey or reach out to your guides directly and get information. So a lot of shamanic journey is cultivating the interface between the conscious thinking mind with being able to accurately and successfully interpret and see energetics, and more to the point, filter energetics, because there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the energetic world. But if that's not available for any of these reasons, what the guides were showing me is they said, look, you humans are these souls that incarnate into these physical bodies, which, we're undoubtedly aware of, and you have this connection that goes to your higher self in upper world. So there's a part of your soul that remains in the realm of the spirit, and you have a committee of guides that oversee you, and there's a connection that goes into your crown chakra that is your DSL, always on, internet, super stable connection. And then you have, of course, the grounding cord. That's really important. Some metaphysical people don't develop their grounding cord. Ideally, you have connection to the earth, connection to spirit, and then this energetic anatomy that overlays our physical body that works together and collaborates to get the physical body the juice and the energy it needs. If you're having chronic fatigue, one of the possible remedies is soul retrieval, because a lot of my clients kind of hover outside their body, and that just makes the body have to work really hard. It really limits the vitality and energy that's available to it. So within this, what the guides were illuminating is we all have an inner wise one. We all have the part of us that is directly connected to our higher self and our team of spirit guides that is within our energy field. So there's no reason to send your awareness out of it. You go deep within to talk to that person. And if you are, working with a gender binary, as most of us are, it could be your inner wise man or your inner wise woman, or it can be, non-binary. It doesn't matter. For me, I think of it as my inner wise woman. And we can cultivate relationship to that part and use our conscious awareness to go in and talk to that aspect of us. Because the thing of it is, that part, no matter what else is going on, can safely connect to the universe and the unseen world and all of our guidance and all of our wisdom, and is completely impervious to being interfered with by entities or the loudness of the world. It's an eternal, deep well and part of our nature. But because the soul didn't naturally come in speaking English or having the kind of mental focus to drive a car, or all these things that we get up to, this part doesn't necessarily have a direct line of communication to this aspect of ourselves. And I would offer that it's a learnable skill with focus and intention to begin to go within rather than without. A lot of journeying is you go to this other place. You go to upper world, you go to middle world, you go to your sacred garden, you go to lower world. And all of that's great. All is right and good with this. But this work is about going within to this part of you and starting to learn how to use your conscious mind to hear and understand the well of wisdom, the what would my wise person do? It's a good question to be able to ask and to commit to and to flow with. So I'm a fan of the kind of on the spot walking vision quest, where you just go for a walk in nature and hold the question, what wisdom does my wise one have for me? What counsel would they give me in this situation or problem? How would they help me? And as anyone who's been listening to me babble for any period of time knows, I'm a huge fan of just being in right relationship and collaboration with all the parts of ourselves. So I talk about the instincts needing adult supervision so that we're caring for them and keeping them from being all constantly freaked out and really loud. And it's good to be in touch with our creativity. It's good to balance the yin and the yang, the being and the doing. We just want to have parts that are working together. In my 8-month chakra program, the 8th month after we've done healing for each of the chakras is all about helping the chakras to see that they're on the same team. And as I offer it year after year, there's more and more that creeps in where I'm getting a head start on, like, hey, solar plexus and heart chakra, let's not have a power struggle. Let's have a both and relationship, and there's just a lot that is really valuable about having all these parts working together. And this deep, wise counsel, this isn't a part of you that's going to tell you what to do, but it's a well of your own clearest wisdom. And proactively cultivating, talking to it will be really helpful in those moments, like I mentioned, when emotions are running really high, you're triggered and activated. So you lay the pathways so that you can, be able to access that. So there are a lot of different ways to go about this. You can journal with the question. You can go for a walk in nature and just keep asking, what would my wise one say? What counsel does it have for me? This part of you might communicate in dreams or images or emotions or vibration. And that's kind of the trickiness of learning to use our psychic ability, is that, it shows up in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's words, sometimes it's pictures, sometimes it's vibration and feelings. There are just many, many different ways that we can access, and it's not really a one-size-fits-all. However, if you're proactively creating a really good ability to interface with this part of you, it will be available during times of stress. And if you're someone who has an overly permeable energy field and has started to have some adverse experiences, or you have a lot of fear of that, it's a place that you can go without changing the structural integrity of your energy field. You don't have to send your awareness outside your body. You're leaving yourself really firmly, solidly in your body and accessing the wisdom of the universe as brought through your individual spirit, an aspect of your individual spirit. And I think this is worthwhile, whether you journey a bunch, out into other places or not. Either way, I think this is a really valuable use. We do a lot of shamanic journey and psychic, kinds of practices that take us away from ourselves and kind of out somewhere. And I'm a fan. I do that all the time. I've done more than 10,000 shamanic journeys that look like that, quite a bit more. It's been this like marvelous way to use my awareness and to have these, exquisite experiences. And again, I had a lot of training about how to do that in a really safe way that didn't disrupt my, my everyday life. And it wasn't with any kind of ayahuasca or anything, it was kind of the old-fashioned way of practice and consistency and building that muscle and that strength. So one of the lovely things is I just haven't had a lot of adverse experiences. I haven't been frightened by the unseen world, which is marvelous. But whether you have or you haven't, this intimacy with yourself, being able, I've talked in other places about, using your awareness to see where there are rips and tears in your auric field and to repair those. That's in my energy body illumination program, which is the manual I wish someone had given me between the ages of 7 and 17 and then sat with me and made me do the homework, because I probably wouldn't have done it even if I had the very valuable information. But it's a really good process to reweave your auric field. And if you are trying to make an important decision to say, wow, I'm really ambivalent about this. Wow, which chakras are really wanting to go forward and which chakras have some really deep concerns? Because it's very difficult to have a sustainable path if we ignore a hell no from any of our chakras. And even if it's illusionary, even if it's like, I'm really afraid of this, but it's just an illusion. It's an old story. Unresolved fear that is too high. I think there's a certain amount of like, oh, I'm a little bit anxious. That's okay. I'm in a new situation. That's normal. But if we try to kind of force ourselves past, like, it's not valid to be afraid, it's not logical, we can end up, with some set of circumstances where we lose our way and, get lost on the freeway. A friend of mine told me about a time where she had disclosed some really, really vulnerable stuff to her therapist that she really hadn't told anyone. She wrote it down and gave it to him when she left the session. And she just described going to her session the next time and just continually taking the wrong freeway and going this way and that way and driving and eventually ending up there right as the session would have ended. And, and the very kind, therapist at the time, didn't choose to have like, well, you got to abide by the boundaries. And he just was like, no, come on in. We'll work with this. But this part of her was, just really in struggle with the journey forward of reckoning with some traumas that she'd survived. So there's so much merit to using your psychic ability to go internally, to see what's going on, to even talk to the consciousness of an illness. I love supporting people in physical health and doing extraction of bacteria and viruses. It doesn't, negate the need to, do all the physical things that are supportive, because something's in the body at the level of fact at that point. But, we can work with inflammation. All is well. You're okay. You can calm down. That's a really powerful use of shamanic awareness and work that you can bring online for yourself. So I know I've covered a lot of ground here, but I just really want to invite you to think about finding a path forward. And I've mentioned some. I know the mind will have the objection of like, I don't know how to do that. And if you re-listen, I offered for your research and development some different ways to do it. I'll kind of recap. You could listen, if you do shamanic journey, you could do a regular drum shamanic journey to go talk to your wise one. You could do some journaling, what would my wise one counsel? You could listen to music and just get really still with yourself and just be with the question, what does my wise one want me to know? You could go for a walk in nature and ask that question, repeatedly. There are a lot of different ways to kind of access and get in. And for some people, sitting meditation is great, and other people, moving meditation is great. But when you go to this part of you, and it takes some doing, because it's this part's consciousness and awareness, and it hasn't lost its connection to the eternal. It's both connected in space and time, like the rest of us, in the moment and the individual experience, as well as connected to the eternal and our soul's journey. And that kind of awareness isn't prefrontal cortex linear thinking. And so we're building an effective interface with an aspect of ourselves. And there are lots of ways to do this. We can do this with our body. We can do this with our fight or flight system, where we start to have a really effective interface. And that just opens up a lot of really cool things that can support you in thriving in the world. So whichever of those aspects you might be navigating in your life, whatever or several that apply to you, I hope there's some wisdom here that will help you to feel like you have another way to connect to the eternal, to your deep wisdom, to your spirit guides, that goes within rather than without, because sometimes that's the most appropriate way to approach this sort of thing. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.